Reserves with an upper end that is flat at the discount rate. We have a downward sloping demand curve as well. And at the lower end, we have another flat portion that moves with interest on reserves. Interest on reserves is the interest that banks are paid by the Federal Reserve on their reserves. And when we add that supply of reserves market, we get our equilibrium policy rate where the two curves cross. As long as that supply curve is intersecting the demand curve in that lower end where it's flat, then we have ample reserves. If that supply curve was intersecting the downward sloping portion of the demand curve, that would be scarce reserves. Ample reserves has two main policy tools. The first one is open market operations. Under ample reserves, though, that isn't used to target the policy rate. It is used to maintain the ample reserves. When the Federal Reserve buys bonds on the open market, it shifts the supply of reserves to the right, keeping us in that lower end of the demand curve. Central banks with ample reserves also have administered rates they can change. The discount rate moves the upper end of that demand curve, and most importantly, the interest on reserves rate moves the lower end of that demand curve. And that is the key policy tool for ample reserves, because it's the shift of that lower end of the demand curve, up or down, that actually changes the policy rate. So it doesn't matter if we have ample reserves or scarce reserves. Either way, central banks are going to use expansionary monetary policy to fight unemployment. Here we have a recessionary gap, which means we will have high levels of unemployment. In order to restore long-run equilibrium, the central bank is going to take action. If we have scarce reserves, expansionary policy means buying bonds, lowering the discount rate, or lowering the reserve requirement. That will lower interest, and with that, we will have more gross investment. If the economy has ample reserves, they will decrease the interest on reserves rate, or they can decrease administered rates, which will move both the upper and lower portion of the demand curve. Either way, we see a lower policy rate, which increases gross investment. And when we see that increase in gross investment, that's going to shift our aggregate demand curve to the right, closing that recessionary gap. If, on the other hand, we have an inflationary gap, that means the central bank is going to use contractionary monetary policy to close that gap. If there's a scarce reserve system, that means the central bank will sell bonds, raise the discount rate, or raise the reserve requirement, which will shift that money supply curve to the left, meaning higher interest and lower gross investment. If the economy has an ample reserves banking system, then they will increase the interest on reserves rate, which increases the policy rate, or they could also increase the administered rates, which is both the discount rate and interest on reserves, which would move both the upper and lower portion of that demand curve. Either way, we see an increase in the policy rate, which is going to decrease gross investment. The other financial market you need to know for this unit is the loanable funds market. First, we have the demand curve. That's the investment demand curve. At higher interest rates, businesses demand less investments, and at lower interest rates, businesses buy more investments. And of course, investment is purchases of physical